Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the second segment of the show, the Dave Emmons Show. And we're being syndicated through WODY Radio. Eddie Carson is my man there that I'm contacting. OdysseyRadioLive.com, and that's the radio station that you'll hear the audio portion. And my guest today from UK is Charles Christian. And we got into talking about UFOs, but that's a subject I guess everybody's hearing. What I want to know more about is the cryptid knowledge this man has and the Bigfoot in UK. Charles Christian, you was mentioning the Bigfoot, what you call him in UK. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, it's called a woes, and wood as in tree, woes, WOSE, and it's really a kind of hairy man who fits in with descriptions of Sasquatch, the Yeti, the Alamanti, and various other large cryptids, missing links, if you like, that people have encountered. And it was quite a phenomena in the medieval period. If you look in lots of old churches, you will find carvings of these wild men on the fonts and over the church doors and things. And so, you know, it's a long established element of English folklore. I think it also links in with other legends like Jack in the Green and the other types of
Jack in the Green. Could you explain that?
Yeah, Jack in the Green is a sort of a person who is within trees and is hard to see and moves around, and again is celebrated in various folk festivals these days, and you'll have somebody dressed up in leaves and branches dancing about. There's a long tradition of it, and of the foliate heads, which are these carvings you see in old churches of a face that's got leaves coming out of it and around. So there's a long tradition that out in the woods there are wild people, wild men and wild women out there, and it very much follows the same descriptions of Sasquatch and other forms of cryptids, you know, that they keep themselves to themselves, that they are broadly humanoid, that they walk like humans as opposed to walk like monkeys, or walk like, you know, they're quite clearly of a human nature. And there are still accounts of them cropping up in the modern day. And there's, not far from where I live, there's a section of road where there's been a number of accounts of people driving at night and saying, you know, a large, hairy, human-like being ran across the road in front of me. And, you know, it's an area where there's lots of thick forest where theoretically, if such a creature existed, they could shelter and hide away.
I know we have investigating groups here in America. I know you guys do too, in hunting cryptids. Matter of fact, you're going to be telling us about one that you were commissioned to do. And
exactly, yes. I mean, obviously, you know, it's really more a sort of a recording evidence, but you know, there are lots of sightings in the 20th century and 21st century of these creatures. And I mean, what's intriguing, and this is where we came back to the point we made at the beginning about, you know, traditional conventional scientists, orthodox scientists saying, you know, doesn't exist, couldn't possibly exist, is that we are now discovering that the human family is a lot more complicated than we thought. I mean, the old idea was primitive creatures, ape men, if you like, moved into becoming Neanderthals, and then eventually humans came along, Homo sapiens. Well, we now know that there were the Denisovans who were living at the same time as humans and the Neanderthal, all three of us.
Could you tell us about them? I mean, a lot of
people. The
people.
Denisovans are a branch of the human family tree that existed parallel to us, but died out perhaps 10, 20,000 years ago, but coexisted with Neanderthals. And their remains have been found in parts of Central Asia, Russia, but their DNA has been found in other relics, including Neanderthal, and that humans, modern humans, have a bit of Denisovan DNA in them. Right. And I say that's one of them. The Chinese recently have found a type of human they call the dragon man, and that again appears to be a parallel creature that, you know, coexisted at the same time as humans. And we had that story about 5 years ago of the Indonesian island of Flores, where they found small people. They called them the hobbits.
Yes.
And they were about 3 to 4 feet tall. And, you know, they weren't suffering from dwarfism or anything. They were fully fledged members of the human family, but small. So, you know, we're discovering that the human family is a lot more complicated, and that we had all these cousins, if you like. And so are things like Sasquatch, woes, Yeti, yet more cousins of the family that we didn't know about that are out there.
Right. And it's hard to determine whether they are earthbound, real human physical creatures, or are they coming through portals or dimensional, periods. That's something too that we're looking at. They talked about Bigfoot here. He just disappears sometimes. Some people have shot at him and actually hit him, and he just disappears. And it could be a dimensional thing. So I guess that's all up in the air with all the cryptids, except some of the few I think you talked about in Indonesia. I think those little people, those are real, and they hide out in the jungles and they stay away from us, just like Bigfoot does. And it's hard to determine.
I mean, the people, just to jump in, aren't
no, that's fine.
The current people in Indonesia on the island of Flores, the locals, as opposed to visiting scientists, the locals say the little people are still there. And they say they didn't die out. There's not as many of them as there used to be, but they're still there and they're hiding out. And they're surviving. And I say this comes back to the point we were making earlier, that there are lots of creatures out there that have escaped our attention, and now we're discovering them. So what else have we still got to discover? You know, I mean, the classic example is the coelacanth, the armored fish.
Yes.
Which was known as a fossil and was assumed to have died out a couple of 100 million years ago. And then in the 1930s, people started fishing them out, living off South Africa, and they are still there. And we now know coelacanth are still existing, but they apparently disappeared from the historical record for millions of years. Well, what else is out there that's doing the same thing? And I say, I think this is the thing, that everything is a lot more complex than, if you like, what we were taught in school. And, you know, the ascent of man from, you know, monkey to ape to Neanderthal to modern man. It's a lot more complicated, and the whole family tree is a lot more complicated. And there's a lot of, I think, more is going to be discovered as we go forward.
Have you ever been to Loch Ness and looked for Nessie?
I have been to Loch Ness, not doing a scientific search, but certainly out with some binoculars, peering around. It has to be said, it is a very, very long loch. And it is also very deep. And so it's actually be very difficult to monitor the whole thing.
That's like,
but I mean, that again is one where there are legends going back to medieval times,
Right.
of monks of that era having encounters with monsters in both Loch Ness and another loch nearby, just as the Great Lakes, there's various lake monsters in North America. So again, you think that, well, it's not just fake news that somebody invented in the 1930s. And it does seem that the famous picture, the doctor's photograph, as it's called, is a fake and was faked up. But that's rather spoiled the effect that
it does.
there was a long-running story pre-existing the fake news, if you like.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that is the case with a lot of these things, that we're getting a blurring of, as we were talking about UFOs as well, the experts who come in and know everything, squeezing out the people who are actually having the experiences. And I think, that some of the stories, the fake stories, have blotted out the real stories, and
That's true.
everything gets said, oh well, it's all fake, it's all
Mm-hmm.
but it's looking that bit in the middle.
Yeah, Charles, have you ever heard of L.A. Marzulli? He does a lot of investigations. I had him on the show last week. He told me of a story of Nephilim. I noticed you have Nephilim in your notes. And there was Nephilim in Afghanistan, and our troops, a Marine platoon, ran into a cave of Nephilim, and they ran into 2 or 3 of them. And they Nephilim were tall. They must have been 12, 14 feet tall, and they were huge, but they were very fast, he said. And they killed a couple of Marines before the Marines had a firing line and started shooting these things, and they killed one, and the helicopter drug it out. Is that true? I'm not sure. Those are, what do you know about the Nephilim? Yeah.
Well, I mean, the Nephilim is another of those elements that we've had legends about them stretching way back, to biblical times. And you have to ask yourself, is it plausible that somebody who was writing the Bible, some parts are 10,000 years old, some of it was only written up in more recent times, but is it really realistic to think somebody thought, I know, why don't we have a story about giants? It's not plausible. They must have had that. They must have had something to prompt it. And we know, for example, that the Denisovans appear to have been, from their bones, they've only ever found parts of them. So the structure's not quite known yet, but seem to have been taller than average humans, which again fits in with some of the tales of the likes of Bigfoot and so on, that they're taller than the average human.
Right.
There are constant stories throughout history of giants' bones being found and lost. In some instances, they've been misinterpreted. But again, it's this common theme that giants once existed, whether they were, as the Bible would have it, the result of fallen angels mating with humans, or whether they were just simply a race of giants. We have Goliath in the tale of Goliath. So, were there once giants out there that were another of the sort of branches of the human race, and they have slowly become extinct or pushed to the boundaries and to marginal areas? And I say Afghanistan is known for being a fairly bleak, hostile place, inaccessible. It's the sort of place that if you were a creature hiding out from humans, it's the kind of place you'd go, a marginal place you'd go, so that you were out of the way and less likely to encounter them. So I don't know whether they were, directly linked to the biblical Nephilim, or whether it's just giants of some form. But again, it fits in with, if you like, the archaeological evidence that there were bigger creatures out there. Homo gigantus, is one of the names for some of the skeletons that have been found.
Yeah, Gigantopithecus. Yeah,
Gigantopithecus. It's there's once again, there's two sides to it. You can't just say, oh no, it's all fake news. It's like with so much, there is an element of truth lying at the origin of it. It's just that over the years that's got misinterpreted or looked at in a different way, and we've lost the significance of it.
Yeah, there's been too many sightings, like with the UFOs right now, that there's so many sightings, so many films made of the sightings that we can't deny them. Neither can the government. And now with all these cryptids, we're starting to get information on the cryptids, but they're a little bit slower in us finding them because, like you said, they hide out in caves, they hide away in places where we can't get to them, in mountains and everything. But let's talk about a cryptid that really is been in the movies a lot. You were commissioned to do a story or work on this.
Yes.
The werewolf. I want to hear
werewolf.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this was I wrote a book about. I will show the latest version of the book shortly. About the folklore of part of the north of England, which is where the Yorkshire woes and Wold Newton comes in. And one of the stories that I'd encountered as a youth and followed up was that in the Middle Ages, this area was plagued by a werewolf, and it was a shape-shifting werewolf that would look like a human during the day and would hang around inns and markets, and it would scope out potential victims, namely people who were travelers who would be heading along a lonely road at the end of the day to the next town or wherever they were staying. And then it would turn into a wolf and lead a pack of wolves who would then attack the travelers, kill them, and eat them. And this werewolf was known as Old Stinker because it had putrid breath, supposedly because it ate carrion. And it's an intriguing story because this particular area was troubled by wolves in the Middle Ages, to the extent that money was donated to create a hostel so that people on the road could take shelter there at night and not be attacked by the wolves. So you've got a tradition of wolves there, and it developed into a tradition that one of them was a werewolf. And this werewolf made reappearances in history in subsequent centuries. And even when I was growing up, there was a report of a truck driver having his cab attacked by a large wolf-like creature while he was on the road. But he, accelerated away and survived. Anyway, I wrote about that. And then a couple of years later, in 2015, there were sightings in a town called Hull, which is only 30 miles as the crow flies from where I was talking about Old Stinker the werewolf.
Right.
And there were sightings of people saying it was a werewolf, a giant wolf-like creature that was prowling along a particular area of Hull, where there's an old canal known as the Barmston Drain. And this became known as the Beast of Barmston Drain. And a newspaper journalist from Hull contacted me and said, "You've written all about Old Stinker. What do you think it is?" And I rather jokingly said, "I think it must be Old Stinker's come back from the undead and is now haunting Barmston Drain." And they said, Oh, I'm glad you think that. Would you like to come with us and a photographer to look for the wolf? So we went out on a werewolf hunt on the night of a full moon.
Yeah, that'd be fun. Yeah.
That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Yes.
Scary and fun. Yeah.
So of course, I said yes. You know, that's what you do.
Yeah.
And we met up in an old churchyard, you know, to get the right atmosphere, and then spent a couple of hours going along this canal looking for a werewolf. Now, I have to say, I was rather under the. I suspected we weren't actually going to encounter a genuine werewolf, but I did fear we might encounter a very large wild dog of a sort of wolf-like nature, you know, a sort of a feral pet that had gone wild. You know, we get a lot of people who have huskies and similar dogs, and then they realize just how big they are and how much exercise they need and how much food they need and how expensive that is, and so they let them loose. I did suspect that that was more likely the cause, that there was this big, huge, feral, wolf-like creature, which we know we don't have wolves in the wild in England. So that would have been terrifying for anybody who'd seen it.
Right. The American Native Indians here in America, they have these folklore stories about shapeshifters, you know, and the wolves and stuff. So it kind of reminds me of what you're saying.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I say that there is a tradition of, you know, shamanism, that people can become embedded or become the spirit of an animal, and that they can, you know, you hear lots of tales about people who go into a shamanistic trance and they are flying with eagles, or they're flying with crows, or they're running with foxes and running with hares, and they believe they are. And again, in this particular part of the world, they found lots of archaeological remains of deer skulls, and it's thought that the people, and these were dating back to 10,000 years ago, the people were putting on the deer skulls and deer pelts to sort of take on the spirit of the deer and get in the right mood to then hunt the deer, because the deer were rather like the buffalo were to the Native Americans, source of food, sinew, skins, etc. So the valuable creatures. So there is this sort of overlapping element. And there's also the fact that in the year 1066, which is the Norman conquest, it was also the last Viking invasion of England. And a Viking army marched through the area where old Stinker used to be. And among the Vikings, there's this tradition of berserkers, people who would, as a result of taking alcohol and drugs and various other things, they would psych themselves up that they were the spirit of a wild animal. And berserker means the spirit of a bear. And they'd have a, you know, a bear skin on them and a bear skull on their heads. But there were also another group who took the view that they were the embodiment of wolves. And so, you know, by coincidence, you have this situation that where there's a site where supposedly a werewolf existed, at a point in history, a bunch of Vikings went through, spluttered in blood from a battle, wearing wolf skins. And so for anybody sort of cowering behind in some bushes, seeing this army go past, what would you think? What are these people? Or are these wolves? Or are these half men, half wolves? So again, you're getting back to whatever the story is, there is a nugget of fact behind it, and that it's sometimes misinterpreted.
Right. Now, you mentioned dragons. Could that be the reptilian aliens that we talk about?
It could be. I think dragons are probably, there's two elements of them. The one is that they may be some form of cryptid that's still surviving through, like the Loch Ness monster, which is, you know, a big dinosaur, and like the Native American tales of the Thunderbird and the Mesoamerican tales of Quetzalcoatl sort of thing,
Right,
you know,
yeah.
flying winged
Right.
creatures that are almost like dragons. I mean, I wrote about it in one of my books, because there's this.
That's where I want to stop right now, and then let you tell us where we can get a hold of your information.
Right, let
We've got
me
a
do
couple of
that.
minutes left here.
Right, yes, time is on the march. Right, I've
Yes,
got
it goes so
two books
fast.
out.
Okay.
I know. The first one is, most recent one, is called The Mysterious Wool-Newton Triangle, and its subtitle is Wraiths, Werewolves, and Other Weird Tales.
That's interesting.
And
Yeah. Show that. Hang it up high, a little higher. There you. Let's see. There you go. And everybody can get a shot of that. Yeah, we got it.
Right.
Okay.
There we go.
That'd be a good.
And that is available on Amazon,
okay.
both in the US and UK, in print and in digital.
Okay.
And a previous book that came out last year, again available on Amazon, it's a bit bigger cover, is called Shuckland. And that relates to where I am living now.
Okay.
And Black Shuck is a demon dog that's the center of a lot of the folklore around this part of the world.
Right. Mm-hmm. Is there anything
you
like
can,
any shows or anything that you're coming up on, or any website?
Right. Well, my website is urbanfantasist.com, all one word.
Yeah, I'll put that in the
urbanfantasist.com.
yeah,
And
that in the write-up. Yeah.
Yep. And I also I'm no longer doing the podcasts as discussed earlier, but I do have videos going out on YouTube, and you'll find it on the Weird Tales show. And look for that, and you'll find my videos there, and they're on similar topics and folklore.
Right. Can you believe? Yeah,
legends.
time is up, Charles. Thank you.
It's
so
been
much.
wonderful talking to you. Yeah.
And to you, I know there's so much more I want to get to, but maybe we'll have you come back and we'll go back into the history of time. Gobekli Tepe, you talked about that in your notes. We'll get to that some other time. I love talking to you. You're a great guy.
Yeah.
Charles Christian, my guest, and this is the Dave Emmons Show, and we're syndicated through WODY Radio, and that's in Maryland. Eddie Carson, OdysseyRadioLive.com. So thank you very much, Charles, and thanks everybody for listening. And this is a great show. Thank you so much.